Hello, everyone. Welcome back to xRaised, where we take a look at industry evolution through the eyes of those creating change and innovation. I'll be your host, Rosalie, for this online show where we'll discuss and learn the latest, most exciting developments from industry leaders, pioneers, and innovators who are shaping the future. Today, we'll be speaking with Jamal Hamidu. He is the founding CEO of North Sakara Consulting, creator of Change Portal Platform, and author of the upcoming book on AI leadership called The Realistic Optimism. He has extensive professional experience, having held roles at Deutsche Bank and Shell. Today, Jamal will talk to us about AI adoption and the concept he developed called Inclusive AI by Design. So without further ado, let us welcome our guest. Jamal, how are you doing today?
I'm doing very well. Thank you very much for having me. Inclusive AI by design is something that I've been passionate about, so I'm very happy to talk to you about it today.
Of course, yeah, I'm really looking forward to our conversation. It sounds incredibly interesting. But to start off for our audience, could you explain what exactly inclusive AI by design is and why does it matter now more than ever?
Sure. So when I say inclusive AI by design, I mean building inclusion into the system right from the start. It's not something you throw in at the last minute. It's about asking the right questions early.
Mm,
So who are we designing this for? Whose data are we using? Whose lived experiences are shaping the system? We are not talking about fairness features or accessibility tools after everything else has been built. This is about designing for inclusion from the beginning. So it shapes how the system works, not just how it is corrected later. Because once these systems go live, it's often too late.
mm,
They get embedded in decisions. So things like hiring, healthcare, policing, education, those decisions scale very quickly. If inclusion wasn't built in LA, exclusion shows up fast and
mm,
often it shows up very quietly. That's why inclusion by AI by design matters. It helps us build systems that recognize more people from day one, not just the majority,
mm,
not just those who are already well represented. And it lets us be honest.
mm,
It's
mm,
not just the right thing to do, it's a smart strategy. So inclusive systems tend to be more adaptable, more trusted, and more resilient over time. That's why inclusive AI by design is very important for us to talk about at this time in the AI revolution.
absolutely. Well, I can see exactly what you're talking about. And yeah, it sounds like an incredibly important part of AI that needs to be addressed right now. And you've argued that inclusion in AI can't simply be retrofitted, that once these systems are deployed, it's often too late to fix who they exclude, as you just mentioned. So can you unpack what you mean exactly by that and why it makes early design so critical?
Indeed, yes. So here's the core of it. Inclusion has never been automatic in tech,
Mm,
right from history. So let's be honest, people were left out of the internet era, left out of the mobile era, left out of the digital services boom, not because they opted out, but because we didn't design for them from the beginning.
mm,
We assumed people had fast internet or reliable electricity or high literacy or certain ways of interacting with technology.
mm,
And when those assumptions didn't hold, the people affected were often ignored and not accommodated. And that's the mistake we're about to repeat with AI. By this time, the consequences are deeper because AI isn't like a website you can update or an app you can patch. It doesn't just show content, it decides who is visible, who is credible, who gets access, and who gets left out.
mm,
And once that logic is deployed, it doesn't stay still. It scales. It spreads quietly through hiring tools, credit models, medical triage systems, educational platforms. And it keeps learning, often from incomplete or biased data. So by the time you notice exclusion is happening, it's not just a feature to tweak, it's a pattern that's already embedded.
mm,
That's why I say inclusion AI can be retrofitted. Because what you don't design for at the start becomes what you build into the system later. And at that point, it's not just exclusion, it's automation of exclusion, which is even worse.
mm, mm, absolutely. And in terms of getting into the finer details of it, how do we actually design differently? How do we include inclusive AI by design?
That's a great question. So let me just walk you through how we actually design differently. So the first thing we need to do is to learn differently.
Mm,
And what that means is that we need to start leading with what I call realistic optimism. Realistic optimism is essentially saying that let's be excited about AI. That's great. Let's move quick. That's great because of competition. Let's make sure that AI is useful for everybody. That's valid. But let's do that responsibly.
mm,
And doing that responsibly also include being inclusive.
mm,
So that's the foundational layer that we have to build. We have to get that right. And once we get that right, then we are getting somewhere. It's not about guilt to say we didn't do it properly in the past. It's about growth. And that's what it takes to get the first step going.
mm,
The second thing we need to do when we are designing for inclusion is we need to broaden the tables. That means rethinking whose voices, whose experiences are shaping the system from the start. And I don't mean token diversity or ticking boxes. I mean real representation of different environments, access levels, learning styles, lived realities. Because if everyone in the room shares the same preference points, they will make the same assumptions and miss the same people. The third thing we need to consider is we need to do what I called an audit of the data.
mm,
Because this is where the exclusion often begins, quietly, not through the obvious errors, but through the invisible gaps. So if the training data that is used in building the AI systems don't include the people that need to be there, then the diversity is missing. The people that we need to be there are missing.
mm,
And you can't fix that with good intentions. So you have to ask who is missing from this data set? Whose reality is being left out? So, and the way I usually like to explain this is by using an analogy. So think of it this way, Rosalie. Let's say you are building a national weather app
mm,
using data from just one city. The app might still work, but only for the people that live in that city. It
mm,
won't be a representation of that national representation that we're looking for. And that's why we have to audit early and often. Because if the input is narrow, the output will be too. The fourth thing we need to do when we are building with inclusion in mind is we have to test the systems differently. So testing can't just be asking, does it work? It has to ask, who does it work for?
mm,
That includes edge users, people on older phones, people with slower internet, or using assistive tech. And if we only test under ideal conditions, we are designing for ideal users, and that leaves everybody else behind.
mm,
Now, the fifth thing that we need to do is we need to ensure we design with inclusion to read. We essentially need to reassess how we define success. What does success actually looks like? That's the fifth thing we have to think about. Because teams optimize for what they are measured against. And if success only means speed, scale, or technical accuracy, then inclusion won't get prioritized. But if we embed inclusion into our KPIs and KBIs, which are key behavior indicators, then it becomes trackable, actionable, and visible. So let me just give you a few examples of what behaviors I'm talking about here. So, for example, did the pilot include people who are often overlooked? Individuals with limited digital access, lower tech confidence, or underrepresented regions? Were insights from those individuals actually used to improve the system? Or were they simply noted and set aside?
mm,
Did the team simulate real world constraints like regional speech, low bandwidth, or screen readers? Was feedback collection accessible and inclusive? And when making go no go decisions, was inclusion treated as a must have or a nice to have?
mm,
These are fundamental questions that need to be asked when we are building or deciding what success actually looks like. And these behaviors are signals. They show whether inclusion was truly operationalize or simply acknowledge in theory. Because inclusion can compete with speed unless it is built into how we define success. But when we do that, when we measure the right things from the start, then inclusion becomes a design discipline,
Mm,
not just a value. And that's how it sticks. And that's how we measure for success.
absolutely. Well, it's really interesting to hear you talk about this and how vital it is to include this. And in terms of that, what are the most overlooked faces of digital exclusion in today's AI landscape?
Rosalie, this question really hits close to home for me.
Mm,
I grew up in a beautiful part of the world, full of culture, full of community, full of resilience, and there was a real sense of possibility. But like so many people across the global south, we also lived with the reality that certain types of infrastructure, like regular electricity or reliable internet, were a luxury, not a given.
mm,
So while boys my age in other parts of the world were exploring with computers, learning to code, or surfing the internet, kids like me and many others in environments like mine were simply just shut out.
mm,
Not because we lacked ambition or talent, but because the enabling systems just weren't there. That's why when I talk about exclusion in today's AI landscape, I don't just mean digital access. I mean something deeper. What I call the four phases of AI driven exclusion. And I'll walk you through those. The first is access. So if you don't have connectivity or your device are outdated to run the latest AI tools, you're locked out before you even begin. The second is representation. So if the data being used to train AI doesn't include your voice, your language, your experience, then as far as the system is concerned, you don't exist.
mm,
The third is usability. A lot of AI tools assume users are highly literate, fast thinking, and fluent in tech, but that's not everyone.
mm,
And when we ignore that, we design for the few and exclude the many. The fourth phase is voice, is the voice. And this one is so often overlooked. It's about who's actually in the room when these systems are being designed, who gets consulted, whose needs are prioritized. When these forms of exclusion stack up, we end up with systems that overlook innovation on the outside, but in practice, they just reinforce old divides. So for me, this isn't just technical, it's personal
mm,
because I know what it means to grow up with potential, but without the infrastructure to unlock it. And that's why inclusive AI by design isn't just a framework I talk about, it's a commitment.
mm.
Indeed.
Yeah. Well, it's a very important commitment, I think, to make as well, and to really uh, introduce into our world and into our society. And some say that inclusive AI is everyone's responsibility. So, who should be held accountable in practice?
This comes up a lot. And in my over decade long experience working in the corporate world, this is always there.
Mm,
Who takes accountability? Who takes responsibility? Um, and that's important, and we need to talk about that.
mm,
Now, the challenge is when inclusion is everyone's job, it can end up being no one's job. What we need is clear accountability. So, in my view, the product or service owner needs to take the lead. They are the ones who decide what gets built, who is it for, and where the trade-offs land.
mm,
But they are not working in a vacuum. Designers have to play a role, making sure the interface is usable for all. Data teams need to check for the bias and blind spots. Governance teams need to write inclusion into policy. And HR and capability teams, well, they are the ones building inclusive thinking into the organization's culture. But ultimately, Rosalie, inclusion needs sponsorship from the top. Leadership has to give it real weight in budgets, in timelines, in KPIs and KBIs.
mm,
Otherwise, it gets sidelined, and then immediately there is a budgetary constraint or some pressure hits. And that's why leadership have to be at the top of the chain.
Mm, absolutely. And why is inclusive design not just the ethical thing to do, but the smart, strategic thing to do?
Honestly, Rosalie, because it's good business, full stop.
Mm.
Inclusive design isn't about slowing down innovation. It's about making it better. It opens up possibilities. It expands reach, sharpens what we build. It's not charity, it's strategy. So why does it really matter? Number one, it opens up the market. Inclusive design brings in people who are usually left out. So those with disabilities, non-dominant languages, low connectivity, or different literacy levels. These aren't edge cases. They are underserved users, often untapped markets. And so now they come into the market because you've been inclusive, and that's good business. Number two, it helps you avoid costly failures. When inclusion is an afterthought, systems break.
Mm.
They break in public, very publicly. This means reputational damage, legal exposure, expensive fixes. Building inclusion in early helps you avoid being reactive later. Number three, it builds trust. People trust systems that recognize them.
Mm.
I think that's just common sense. And that speaks through their language. That doesn't require them to adapt just to be seen. And trust is everything in adoption.
Mm.
If people don't trust it, they won't use it, no matter how good it is. And that's from my experience managing technology adoption for over a decade.
Yeah. Mm.
The fourth thing is it fuels innovation. And we've seen this already. Microsoft's adaptive tools. Originally, when they designed it, it was designed for people with disabilities. This feature is now used by almost everybody. And then there's Netflix interface. Everybody loves Netflix.
Mm.
It started with accessibility for multilingual users,
Mm.
and it became a global expansion strategy for Netflix. So design for the edges, and you often find breakthroughs at the center. The fifth reason why this is smart business is in the world being shaped by AI, it is not optional anymore. So AI systems are making decisions at scale. If they're not inclusive, they are not just limited, they're dangerous.
Mm.
Inclusion isn't a nice to have, it's a form of design foresight. And in this new era, that foresight is essential. Because when we design inclusively, we are not just solving for fairness, we are solving for resilience, for reach, for relevance. We are building systems that last because they serve more people and more fully. And in the age of AI, that's not a moral argument, it's a straightforward advantage.
Mm. Mm. Absolutely. Yeah, well, I mean, everything you're saying is so incredibly interesting and also, very vital to the way that we go forward with AI. And I think it's really important that people listen to this, to what you have to say, and take it into account when going forward with AI adoption. So thank you so much for talking to us today, Jamal. It was so interesting to hear everything you had to say. Uh, and I look forward to seeing, inclusive AI.
Thank you very much, Sally. I'm very pleased to be here. Thank you.
And to our listeners at xRaised, thank you so much for tuning in. I'm your host, Rosalie, and I'll see you next time.